Well, hey there, and welcome to Unmistakably You. I'm Amy from Unmistakably You. I'm a wedding planner and an educator here in London, Ontario. And if you're joining me for the first time, welcome. If you're newly engaged, congratulations. We go live every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Hey, it's 8 o'clock, Wednesday night. And we talk about anything that you might be navigating in your wedding plans as you try to sort of survive the process with some kind of grace, hopefully, and calm, and hopefully still an excited vibe. And you're still looking forward to marrying that special someone at the end of the journey. So, welcome to March. I can't believe we're here already. 2023 is flying by. But we have just wrapped up our Things to Think About If series. So we did that for all of January and February. And it was basically a how to book your venue, how to book your photographer, how to book your floral and decor, and all of the things that you might be looking at if you are newly engaged. So hopefully those things are topical for you now in your planning. But as always, if you are somewhere different in your planning, if you're almost at the end, or if you are somewhere in the middle and you're confused, we encourage you to reach out to us. We're always here and happy to chat. I like to feel like I'm not talking to nobody every Wednesday. So if you're popping in live, please do say hi. Shoot me a quick little comment in the chat. Say, where you're getting married, what you're struggling with in your plans, or if you're catching us on the replay, feel free to, again, post any questions or comments in the chat, or to send me a direct message. I'm always accessible, amy@unmistakably.you.com, and I'm here and more than happy to help with any stage of your wedding planning. Now, throughout March, we thought we would just do a quick little chat about seasonal weddings. If you are still setting the date for your wedding and you're kind of going back and forth between a couple of options in terms of dates and seasons, our hope is that we can shed some light on what to expect from the different seasons and some kinds of things to think about if you are considering a winter or a spring or summer or a fall wedding. So today, we're going to start off with what to think about if you're planning a winter wedding. And then next week, of course, we'll follow with spring, and shockingly, the following week, summer, and then fall. So as always, don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can do. But I just wanted to tackle today a few things to think about if you're planning a winter wedding, as we are in the season right now. We just did a wedding this past Saturday. We've got one coming up on Friday. And there are definitely some considerations if you are listening from our region, which is Southern Ontario. And I assume that most of the people tuning in are probably in our local area. If you're tuning in from Italy, hi, I'm jealous of your weather. If you're tuning in from anywhere else, a lot of what we say may not apply to you if you're in a different geographical region. So most of what I'm going to talk about applies to winter weddings in the snow belt in Southern Ontario, specifically London, Ontario. But of course, this applies to any region where you tend to get wintry weather from somewhere around November until somewhere around March. So that kind of leads to a question as to really what constitutes winter. And in our region, it is November to March. But the issue is that, as climate change happens, and we all know that's a thing, and we're all doing our part, and I hope you're all, recycling and cutting down on your single-use plastics and all of that, but that's another show for another day. We are experiencing some different climate patterns than we've seen in the past. And so when I say winter wedding, I'm a little bit cautious when it comes to weddings that are happening in November and in March as kind of the outliers of that winter period, because those are probably the least predictable months in terms of winter weather. And I kind of assume that if you're planning a winter wedding, you're envisioning snow in our region. And November and March are sometimes a little bit questionable in terms of whether there's snow. And as we've seen this particular winter of 2023 in Southern Ontario, every month is questionable when it comes to snow. So, those are considerations to make if you're having the conversation with your partner about whether to get married in the winter. What if there is no snow? Are we willing to deal with a kind of gray, brown, wet, soggy wedding, or is that not something that we're feeling okay about? Some other considerations to think about if you're getting married in the winter are those weather considerations, and we'll talk about the potential implications for travel in a second. But what about decor considerations, just very generically in terms of holidays that tend to fall in that winter season? Of course, the biggest of those would be the typical Christmas season or the generic holiday season. So you may want to book a wedding around that Christmas season if you're hoping to potentially capitalize on some free decor that perhaps your venue is providing for that season anyway. Or you may want to avoid the Christmas season because you're hoping to stay away from any of that kind of traditional Christmas decor. So that's worth thinking about. And if you're considering a wedding in December, or first week of January even, that's maybe a conversation to have with any potential venues, is about their seasonal decorating and what that might look like. You may also want to consider floral prices and how that might affect the budget of your winter wedding in terms of Valentine's Day, which is certainly a time when we see floral prices go north, and Christmas also to an extent. So thinking about pricing for some of the components of your wedding, like the floral elements, as well as considering the cost of travel. If you're thinking about getting married specifically around that Christmas holiday season, that might have some pricier implications for your guests who are traveling from out of city, out of province, maybe even out of country, because travel prices tend to increase around the December holiday season. You might also want to think about, if you're again looking at that December holiday season, the availability of venues, because a lot of venues in our local market tend to book up for Christmas parties, corporate Christmas parties, friends' Christmas parties, that kind of thing. They tend to book up. And so finding an available venue, depending on your time frame, might also be an issue. So these are kind of generic considerations if you're thinking about getting married in the winter season. But I wanted to tackle a couple of specific things that relate to venue, transportation, guest comfort, and then photo and video, or your physical memories of the day, because realistically, photo and video is what you're left with at the end of the day. So let's dive into those. If you have committed to a winter wedding and you're selecting your venue, there are a few very important considerations to make. So first of all, location is going to be a big one. Is your venue on a major road that is plowed by municipal services? If it's not, what are the snow clearing guidelines? Who does that? If you're dealing with a venue that is in the backwoods, in the country, or on private property, what happens if the snowplows aren't out the day of your wedding and there's a heavy snowfall the day before? And as well, you'll want to think about snow clearing with regard to parking. So again, if you're getting married on private property, is there enough snow cleared to allow cars to park for all of your guests? Thinking also about how far your guests might have to walk from that parking to the venue is also a realistic consideration, because if it's a big walk, what if that walk is snowy or icy? What are your guests going to be wearing on their feet? So thinking about transportation, or just even, walking from parking to venue, is something to consider. Maybe there's valet parking available. Is that something that you want to look into? Maybe hiring a separate valet service. If you're having your ceremony and your reception in two different spaces, what does transportation for guests look like? If you're going from a church to a reception hall, are guests driving themselves? What if the weather is sketchy that day? If the weather is bad and Aunt Velma doesn't want to drive, that might be a concern for you. Is there public transportation available? What about Ubers or taxis? Maybe that's an option, but is that something that's also going to be affected by potential inclement weather? What if the hydro goes out? If you're looking at a hotel or a large banquet facility or something like that, a golf course, it's probably not an issue. But with some smaller venues, maybe venues that are outside of town, what happens if they're not on the major city grid and the hydro goes out? Do they have a backup generator? These are considerations that you'll want to think about if your wedding is happening in a season where inclement weather, ice storms, blizzards might be a potential. Then you'll want to think about guest comfort. Now, I attended my cousin Mitchell's wedding in February of 2017. I was 5 months pregnant at the time. And Mitchell, bless his heart, had a wedding in the back of my Uncle Don's bush where he and his fiance, when they were in high school, built this beautiful little rustic cabin. It's super cute. It would have been lovely. And Mitchell, if you're listening, which I 100% know you're not, it would have been so awesome. The cabin was lovely and it's in the middle of this beautiful bush. If it had snowed, there would have been this light dusting of white powder on all of the trees. It would have been so stunning. They had a blazing fire in the fire pit off to the side. But you know what happened? It was a mild week and there was no fresh snow. All of the fields turned to mud, so they had anticipated transporting their guests from the parking area back to the bush in my Uncle Don's sled, which was drawn by horses. I mean, are you envisioning this? Would have been so beautiful, except everything was muddy and wet and soupy, and there was no horse-drawn sled. There was a horse-drawn wagon, which was bumpy and freezing, even though it wasn't pretty. And then we got back to the bush, and they did have hot chocolate to welcome us, which was lovely. They had this blazing fire, but everything was brown and muddy and gross, but still cold. So here I am, 5 months pregnant, smiling for my cousin and his fiance, now wife, and I'm just miserable, wrapped up in my coat. So what I am saying here is that, the best laid plans, unfortunately, are in Ontario, subject to Mother Nature. So think about your guests and their experience, both in the ideal circumstance where there's beautiful fresh snow and it's not too cold, but it's cold enough to keep everything white and crisp and clean. But then think about the other side of things where it's mild and melty, but still not super comfortable outside and everything is yucky and brown. So if you are getting married in the winter, think about your physical building and its heat. If you're getting married in a venue, it's certainly worth asking the manager or the coordinator what kind of control they have over the heating system. Is it possible to crank up the heat, or is that perhaps controlled somewhere else? Some municipal facilities don't actually have control over the heat. It's controlled by the municipality at the town hall or city hall or whatever. So seems like a silly thing to have to ask, but ask, what, if it's a freezing cold day and it's chilly in here, what happens with regard to the heat? Think about maybe providing pashminas or blankets, depending again on if you have any kind of an outdoor component, or if you have a lot of guests who are maybe older, who might value some extra comfort of a blanket. Pardon me. Getting over a cold. Excuse me. You might think about providing other guest comfort stations like a hot chocolate welcoming bar, or maybe a spiked coffee station. Maybe you want to have that blazing outdoor bonfire, or if there's an indoor fireplace, ask if it's operational and if it can be working during your event. It might be a cute time to incorporate some seasonal favors. Maybe you want to pre-package some s'mores favors. Maybe you can even have a bonfire and have guests cook their s'mores over the fire. You might want to think about hot chocolate favors or maple syrup favors. Maybe monogrammed blankets would be cute. Capitalize on that season. Presumably there's a reason that you chose the season, and maybe the reason you love winter is something that you could then pass on to your guests in terms of the favor. Shoes are something that you definitely want to think about, both in terms of yourselves and your guests. Maybe it's worth stating on a website or in an invitation if you have a bit of a travel distance from parking to venue. Maybe you want to encourage guests to wear sensible footwear and bring something to change into. If they're changing, what about their outdoor attire? Is there a coat check available for your guests? If there's a coat check, is it in a tucked away area, or is it going to be a rack right out in the middle of your reception space, which, while practical, is not that aesthetically pleasing? So thinking about where your guests are going to store the necessities of winter in Ontario, coats and boots, is definitely important. So thinking about aesthetics, of course, also what am I even saying? Also transfers, that's the word, into your photo and video coverage of your day. So if you are hiring professional photographers and videographers, which I hope you are, because those are your lasting memories, it would behoove you, when you're investing in them, to also think about the timeline and how the winter season is going to affect your lighting. In Southern Ontario, depending on the particular month, the sun definitely sets a lot earlier in the winter than it does in the summer. So does that mean then that instead of having a really traditional ceremony, cocktails, dinner, dance, where you do your photos and video during the cocktail hour, maybe you need to switch that a little bit? Maybe you need to do a first look. Maybe you want to take advantage of that mid-afternoon light, maybe push your ceremony a little bit later so that you can get the bulk of your wedding party and formal photos done before the ceremony. And then you don't have to worry about losing the light after the ceremony's over and the cocktail hour starts. And if you've heard me talk about first looks before, you know that I am a big fan because it often frees you up to join the cocktail hour. Not always, but often. And again, no pressure, but things to think about if you are getting married when the sun is going to set at maybe 5 or 5:30 at night. You also need to think about the logistics of outdoor photos. If you are having wedding party or family or just even couples photos done outside, you'll need to think about a couple of things. First and foremost, and I say this because of my wedding last weekend, think about the footwear that you and your wedding party are wearing. Oftentimes, particularly if it's a winter wedding, any females in the party will likely be wearing long gowns. And the reality of that means that you can't see their feet in the photos. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with wearing those Blundstones or wearing those Sorels or bringing something that is going to keep your feet unfrostbitten. The strappy sandals are lovely for the indoor ceremony, but think about just having that conversation with your wedding party. Maybe you want to have male members of the wedding party bring a change of shoes just in case their shoes get wet. They don't want to be wearing wet shoes or salt-stained shoes for the duration of the evening. Maybe you want to allow those female wedding party members to wear some nice warm boots. Or, as one of my brides a couple of Decembers ago did, shout out Janet, she had adorable boots that she bought for the wedding party, and she laced them up with emerald green ribbons. So that matched their dresses. All of the bridesmaids had emerald green laces, and then the bride had ivory laces. It was so cute. Let me know. I'll shoot you a photo. It was absolutely adorable. But that's something to think about, as well as the logistics of how you're going to keep your gown clean. If you have a long gown, and especially if you're doing first look photos where those happen before the ceremony, if you're traipsing around in the snow and potentially in the mud, your gown has the potential to get quite dirty. So thinking about how you're going to prevent that from happening, I actually carry around in my kit a white shower curtain so that if it comes to a point where the wedding party is doing photos and they're all setting up under this beautiful tree and it's snow covered and it's all picturesque, we can put that shower curtain down, drape the gown around it so that it's not touching the snow or the mud, keep everything nice and clean, and still get those beautiful photos. You'll also need to think about the logistics of your flowers outside, particularly if it is below zero. There are certain flowers that are hardier than others, but generally speaking, I don't want to tempt fate. If it is below zero, especially if it's below -10, Flowers are going to shrivel and brown really quickly outside, especially if they're hydrangeas, but all flowers are susceptible to this. So be mindful of, if you have the intention to do photos outside at all, maybe you want to invest in a second set of bouquets, and that's going to be an investment, but it's a consideration that you might want to make. You might also want to think about, if it's very cold, doing your outdoor photos without flowers. I witnessed this happen a couple of years ago. I think it was actually 2019, just pre-pandemic. I did a February wedding. It was beautiful. We had that fresh snowfall. It was everything you want, but it was also minus 15. And that wedding party, they were troopers. They went out and they did those photos outside, and then they would come inside and warm up and shiver, and then they would go outside again, and they did it in short spurts, which was a good strategy, except that they took their flowers with them. And I literally witnessed the hydrangeas shriveling and browning in front of my eyes. Luckily, the florist, shout out Rosemary from Time for Flowers, had brought extras, and we actually ended up swapping a few of those into the bouquets because they were in such bad shape after those photos. So think about your footwear, think about your flowers, and then also think about, if you're doing outdoor photos, do you and maybe any female members of the party want to have some kind of outerwear? Do you want to have a shawl or a cape or a wrap or a fur or something, cute jackets that you can take those outdoor photos in, so that you're not absolutely freezing in your strapless or, spaghetti strap dresses when it's minus 10 outside. You'll also want to think about, of course, what happens if the weather just flat out doesn't cooperate. Making sure you have an indoor photo location is so important. Hopefully you don't need it, but it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. So I have had couples take photos in greenhouses in the past, and they can turn out beautifully. Maybe there's a conservatory somewhere local to you that might be available. Perhaps the hotel where you're staying has some beautiful photo opportunities. There might be a local art gallery, a local university, even a cute pub. It really will pay to scout out the area, or have your photographer and videographer scout out the area before the wedding, to make sure that you do have that backup plan in case the morning of your January wedding, you wake up expecting to see beautiful, thick, white, fluffy flakes of snow, and instead you see drizzle and everything is gray and dead looking. So definitely think about that as a backup plan. Think about your wedding party attire or your family attire, and think about the length of time that you're realistically able to be outside if it does happen to be cold. There are, of course, a million more things that we could talk about with regard to a winter wedding, but I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. And as always, I want to keep it short and sweet so that you can move on with your day. If you're catching me on the replay, pop in a comment and say, hey, Amy, watched it, have a question about this, or hey, thought this was a great idea. We always love to hear from you. And we would just like to encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to pop on over to our website, unmistakably.you.com, and specifically /workshops. If you are planning a wedding for this year, we've got a couple of really incredible workshops coming up. Actually, a week from last night, we've got one with Jody from Something New Officiant that deals with how to personalize your vows. And it is an incredible workshop. We ran it last year, and our couples were just so happy with the meaningful, personal, really special vows that they were able to create. We also have one coming up about, if you aren't working with a day of or a full wedding planner, how to structure your day and then pass it off to a friend or a family member who might be coordinating for you to ensure that things still go smoothly. And then finally, we have a first dance workshop coming up with Clara from See You Move. She's just going to teach you not necessarily a choreographed dance, but a couple of moves to help you feel comfortable, a couple of tips how to, physically deal with your partner on the dance floor so that you look comfortable instead of awkward. As always, we are here to help. Shoot us any questions or concerns or thoughts that you might have. We would love to hear from you. And we will join you next week. Rebecca is going to talk you through things to think about if you're planning your spring wedding. So we'll catch you next Wednesday. Until then, happy planning. Bye-bye.